The legend begins with a whisper, a secret notebook attributed to Burt Lancaster, the kind of private ledger a principled star might keep when the lights go cold and the truth feels heavier than applause. In its pages, so the story goes, he cataloged the brightest names of old Hollywood and the shadows that trailed them. Whether the notebook exists or not, almost doesn't matter. What matters is why we want it to be real. Because deep down, we suspect the golden glow was cast by fires that also burned. Tonight, we are not here to accuse. We're here to hold the spotlight steady and ask harder questions than the press releases ever did. Start with a fact, not a whisper. Elizabeth Taylor became the first movie star to secure a $1 million salary for a single role, Cleopatra. And, more importantly, a share of the gross. That contract didn't just open a door, it kicked one off its hinges. The production itself lurched from crisis to crisis. Relocations, stoppages, creative overhauls, ballooning costs that rattled the studio's bones. Was it pure chaos, or was there a calculus in the chaos? A star who understood that time is money, and that time spent orbiting her would raise the price of admission for everyone else. Taylor's detractors called it manipulation, her admirers called it mastery. Maybe both were simply naming the same storm in different weather. Kirk Douglas played heroes who broke chains, but his clout off-screen could bend steel too. As a star producer, he pushed for choices that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier and put his name behind voices the industry had worked hard to silence. That kind of moral stance doesn't sprout in a vacuum. It grows from power, real, hard, career-making power. If you can open a door, you can also decide who gets to walk through it. Cast lists, rewrites, who stays, and who suddenly isn't right for the part. In a town where a phone call can change a life, a leading man who signs checks is never just a leading man. Was Douglas the icon of integrity, or the quiet hammer behind the scenes? It depends which side of the call sheet you were standing on. The camera adored Natalie Wood's fragility. Audiences saw velvet. Insiders sometimes saw glass. Beautiful, reflective, and sharp. In a system patrolled by columnists with megaphones, a well-timed tear could move mountains no agent could budge. That isn't a flaw. It's a tactic in a world that rarely handed agency to young women. And then there is the night on the water, the questions that never settled, the years of reconsideration that kept drawing a red circle around the same cold facts. If the official narrative can be revised, even slightly, what does that say about the stories we accept when the cameras stop? Maybe the most unnerving part of Wood's legacy isn't the mystery itself, but how easily Hollywood learns to live with mysteries when they're inconvenient to solve. Few faces sold joy like Mickey Rooney's. He wore sunlight like a costume, sprinting through roles with the momentum of a studio era that didn't know how to slow down. But the past has a way of catching the present, and in his later years, he described something audiences weren't prepared to hear, that fame doesn't bulletproof the heart, and power doesn't always belong to the person on the poster. When the man who made a nation laugh speaks softly about feeling small in his own home, you are forced to wonder how many legends were negotiating private hells while we were busy memorizing their punchlines. For a business that insists on happy endings, it's striking how many stars ran out of light long before the house dimmed. Marilyn Monroe was gravity in human form, pulling cameras, colleagues, and entire schedules into her orbit. Directors remembered her lateness, crews remembered waiting, the ledger remembered every hour it paid to stand still. But the camera also remembered magic no one else could conjure. Which truth carries more weight? The cost of the delay, or the profit in the frame? In a world addicted to results, the equation often turns perverse. The more irreplaceable the performance, the more chaos the system will tolerate to capture it. Was Monroe a black hole swallowing discipline, or the supernova that justified the gamble? It depends on whether you're reading the call sheet or watching the dailies. The cruel paradox of stardom is that the same fragility that wrecks a morning can deliver immortality by night. Errol Flynn made gallantry look effortless. Off-screen, the line between reputation and reality blurred under the heat of courtroom lights and public appetite. An accusation is not a verdict, and a verdict is not an eraser. Flynn walked out a free man, but the story never left him, because stories like that never do. Studios manage crises, audiences manage memories. When the swashbuckler brand is welded to a human being, the man and the myth spend the rest of their days chasing each other down corridors no one else can see. If our first instinct is to believe the performance, our second is to doubt it. Where does that leave a legend who can win the legal war and lose the narrative forever? America calls her Lucy. Hollywood calls her something else, the boss. As the head of a studio, Lucille Ball bet on ideas that didn't look safe on paper and out-argued a business that didn't think women belonged at the table. A smile can be a strategy, laughter can be a weapon, a signature can be both. Employees under pressure tell one story, history tells another, and maybe both are true. The job of a studio chief isn't to be nice, it's to be right often enough that the company survives your mistakes. Ball knew that in her bones. If her laughter sounded sharper in the boardroom, perhaps it needed to be. Cutting through noise, slicing through doubt, carving a path only she could see. Joan Crawford turned discipline into a second skin. On screen, she was sculpted steel. At home, the echoes are harder to parse. Accounts from those closest to her don't agree, and perhaps they never will. What they do share is a portrait of control pursued to the edge of obsession of a woman who understood that Hollywood will forgive many things except the appearance of losing control. If you were taught that perfection is survival, what happens when the children you raise refuse to become the statues you expect? The answer depends on which hallway you're standing in and how much noise you're willing to call truth. Pull back, and the pattern stops looking like 7 separate storms and starts looking like climate. The golden age was an ecosystem, publicity machines that could mint myths by morning, studio lawyers who could turn rumors into silence, columnists whose typewriters could lift or level a career before lunch. In that weather, power rarely announces itself. It arrives in smaller shapes. 5 minutes here, a closed set there, a rewrite request phrased as a compliment, a colleague quietly replaced, a scene rescheduled until a point is made without anyone needing to say it out loud. Against that backdrop, the legend of a secret notebook isn't outrageous, it's almost inevitable. If you were a star who still believed in right and wrong, why wouldn't you keep score in private when the public scoreboard lied? What makes these 7 so unsettling is how neatly their shadows map onto their gifts. Taylor's contract genius looks like manipulation from the wrong angle. Douglas's moral stance becomes raw leverage if you're the one who didn't get the call. Wood's softness is also a strategy. Rooney's brightness hides a bruise. Monroe's chaos pays for itself with a frame no one else can deliver. Flynn's charm makes the mismatch between image and allegation impossible to ignore. Ball's laughter builds empires and draws blood when necessary. Crawford's discipline builds cathedrals and turns the house into a church where no one can breathe. None of that requires a criminal, a saint, or a smoking gun. It requires only a system built to spin gold out of whatever a person happens to be. Maybe that's the real entry on Lancaster's final page, not a list of villains but a warning about the tools we reward. We cheer power when it saves a project we love. We hiss at it when it runs over someone we'll never meet. We call the same behavior vision when the box office smiles and tyranny when the budgets bleed. And we confuse personal morality with professional necessity because the movies trained us to. The camera doesn't just capture, it instructs. It teaches us what to forgive and what to punish, then sells us popcorn while we do it. So if a notebook did exist, what would it really reveal? That stars are people, not marble. That the studio era was an arena where grace and ruthlessness often wore the same suit. That every miracle on screen came with a bill someone had to pay. Maybe it would show that legends are made of precise contradictions. A tenderness that cuts, a courage that coerces, a laughter that leads, a beauty that bargains, a discipline that divides. And maybe it would remind us that the oldest trick in Hollywood is giving the audience exactly what it wants while making sure they never see the hands doing the work. Which of these 7 unsettles you most? The contract-turned cudgel, the hero who learned how to swing a different kind of sword, the tear that moves mountains, the painted smile with a quiet crack, the chaos that buys immortality, the charm that refuses to sit where we want it, the laughter that signs checks, or the discipline that won't back down? Tell me in the comments what you think the last line of the notebook should be. Because tonight we didn't read a confession, we read a mirror. And the reflection looks a lot like the town that taught the whole world how to dream.